Hello and welcome. I'm Helen Atkinson, Managing Editor at Supply Chain Brain, and I'm excited to be moderating this webinar today, sponsored by OpenText, the title for which is Supercharging Supplier Collaboration Through a Digitally Connected Ecosystem. Later in the webinar, we're going to open up for a Q&A session with questions from you, the audience. Please submit questions at any time using the tab at the bottom of your screen. We will not be using people's titles or company names, so go ahead and ask anything you like. If you don't see your question come up during the webinar, please be assured OpenText will reach out to you offline. So here's our topic. Effective supplier collaboration is a key requirement for mature supply chain operations. To address the needs for sharing more and more information in a structured way, organizations typically end up deploying a number of supply chain applications and collaboration tools. These tools are needed, but lack of governance and coordination around how they are used together often leads to poor user experience and productivity, fragmented visibility, and failure to deliver the expected ROI. In this webinar, we're going to cover common pain points that many organizations face as they look to digitize supplier collaboration and build truly effective digitally connected ecosystems. We're going to give you plenty of takeaways. First of all, we're going to look at digitizing supplier collaboration and why you should care. That's going to be an interesting topic. Then we're going to look at common challenges and how to tackle them. Then we're going to look at steps to add governance into your existing tools and processes. Then we're going to have a panel discussion. And then we're going to hand it over to you, the audience, with a Q&A. Let's get to our speaker. I'd like to introduce you to Ville Parkkinen from OpenText. Ville is Director of Product Marketing for Business Network at OpenText. Working closely with OpenText product management, engineering, solution consulting, and sales teams, Ville focuses on digitization and automation of supply chain processes. Welcome, Ville.
Thank you so much, Helen, and thank you for the introduction. So as you heard Helen discuss there, so we have a fairly straightforward agenda for a rather complex topic. So let's get right into it. And I really want to start from the high-level perspective of why are we talking about this topic. So why collaboration with suppliers, and for that matter with your other supply chain partners as well, why it's so important is that it's very closely linked to the overall maturity of your supply chain operations. So the model that you see here on the slide is based on a Gartner's view of the world. You have similar ones from other analysts as well. But really, the main point here is that as you are looking to improve the maturity of your supply chain operations, your focus naturally shifts into collaborating first within your organization, so outside of the supply chain function and between the different parts of the supply chain function, but then more importantly with your external trading partners, where obviously the complexity and challenges will be that much greater. So there is this very intrinsic link, and it really relates to, or kind of leads into, this growing pressure that you have, that you need to be sharing more information with your suppliers and other supply chain partners, again, to improve your maturity and really improve the performance of your business. And obviously, saying that you want to share more information with your suppliers, that's one thing. Understanding what are the types of information that you need to be exchanging, that's another thing, and depends on the organization ultimately. I myself have a business degree, so I like these quadrants quite a lot. So I've kind of divided here, I've created this view, very basic view into how you might be thinking about it. So one dimension that you may be thinking about, what is the direction of the information exchange? So is it coming from the suppliers, you're capturing information from your suppliers to your organization, or is it something that you are sharing with towards your suppliers, so sending information or sharing it to them? And the other one is the nature of that information exchange. So is it more of a one-off, maybe periodically updated information, or is it something that's more day-to-day collaborative information exchange as part of your day-to-day operations? So types of information could be capturing details like corporate identifiers, making sure that you know your suppliers, you understand them as a business, and you can track certain things about them. Might be collecting self-reported ESG metrics, or then collecting metrics from third-party sources as well to understand really how your suppliers are, or what kinds of organizations are. In terms of information that you are sharing, it might be very basic. Your obviously locations. You need to let them know where you need to receive certain goods that you're buying from them. But it could also be things like supplier codes of conduct, different kinds of policies and guideline documents. And then when you look at the more dynamic information, this is more the day-to-day stuff. So you're receiving invoices from your suppliers, shipment notices, maybe getting reports on inventory data. Depending on the types of product that you buy, there's product information, things like material data safety sheets. And then similarly, you are then sending certain kinds of pieces of information to suppliers like purchase orders, potentially change orders, different kinds of forecasts. And then maybe you're sharing performance metrics to the suppliers, so they, in the name of transparency, so that they know how they are performing. So overall, it's quite a complex set of information that you're sharing. And I wanted to kind of pause here just a moment and give you a moment to think. So just one sample of the complexity of this underlying information exchange is EDI data, which is very close to my heart, being a representative of B2B integration vendor. But in the EDI standards, there's multiple kinds, and the most commonly used standard in North America is called ANSI X12. So how many document types would you say that it covers? And I mentioned some of these there. So invoices, purchase orders, shipment notices. So how many document types do you think that the X12 standards cover overall? And I'll give you a moment to think, and then I'll go into the answer. So it's actually 326. So if you guessed around 300, you were very close. And it may be a surprisingly large number, but it is a good testament of how complex and how much work has actually gone into making sure that organizations have the tools that they need to share information in a structured format. So X12 is probably one of the more comprehensive standards. EDIFACT, that is used in Europe, more commonly has around 160 document types covered. So X12 has a very large coverage, and you can see what are sort of the different message sets that they use for that information. But just as an example, that there's a lot of details to understand when it comes to information exchange, and this is just one aspect of that. So next, it's a really important question to ask. Like, we talk about supplier collaboration, we kind of intuitively understand that it might be beneficial for us. But a good question to ask is it actually beneficial for the organization? And I wanted to go over some proof points here. These ones are from IDC from a couple of years ago. So they actually looked at the correlation between business performance and the digital maturity of organizations. And they found, as kind of displayed on the graphs there, that the digital maturity of an organization positively impacts both the revenue performance, so you're generating more revenue, and then also profitability. So it is, let's say, supporting evidence for the fact that it actually does matter to focus on digitizing collaboration, that a digital maturity in your supply chain will be advantageous and will help you to compete better in the market. So some proof points there that I wanted to cover, because it is an important topic to ask yourself. Does this actually matter? And evidence is pretty clear that it does. Then let's get into the typical challenges that we have around supply chain collaboration. And what we see a lot that organizations are doing a lot, they are looking at applications to help. So, okay, we need to share, get better visibility into our shipments. So let's look for a real-time shipment tracking application that we can use. And obviously you have already applications that you're using, warehouse management, transportation management systems, different types of supplier portals and so on. And applications are definitely needed. So they are the way to add governance around your processes and really put structure into how you are driving certain business processes. But we oftentimes see that it's not really enough by itself. So, and it's really not a big problem when you only have a few to deal with. But again, if you are increasing the collaboration with suppliers, you likely need to engage in more various types of collaboration, and therefore you may need multiple different kinds of applications. So what tends to happen is that as you deploy more and more, you start to fragment the user experience. So you have disparate applications and data, and oftentimes I ask people, how many browser windows do you have open at any given time, and how many of those are actually applications that you had to sign into to get access to the information there. And once the complexity gets beyond a certain point, so you have to deal with multiple different kinds of tools, this can actually be an inhibitor for productivity for users. And we know from some surveys, I believe that it was a Gartner stat from a couple of years ago, that supply chain professionals are actually 80% of people are feeling overwhelmed with the amount of information that they have to process on a day-to-day basis. So this is a real problem for users. So how much more complexity can they actually deal with? And I think that if you are dealing with managing supply chain professionals, as I think many of you are, you will have seen that in your organization, that this is really a serious problem. So what we can do to help the users to really be productive, but then get rid of some of the stuff that they don't have to worry about, then those are things that are really going to make a difference. That same complexity of using different kinds of applications also has a security impact. So obviously, if you are, particularly when you are let's say, having applications that are accessed by your partners, so suppliers needing to access certain tools to share information with you, the more user credentials and user identities you have, the more or the larger the cyber threat surface is really for your business. So it's another aspect to keep in mind. Then traditionally, integration tends to be a challenge, and it also goes into the usability category. So do the users need to have access to all of the different applications that host the information that they need, or can that information be synchronized so that the user can actually access everything they need within one or two applications? So, and that would be integration, how you can do that. And then finally, a surprising problem, but very common one that we tend to run across is actually not to do with the applications themselves, not with the functionality, but simply getting partners onboarded. So this is something that we hear quite a lot from organizations, that either it is very slow going, getting partners, because it's not just the tool, you also need to collaborate with the supplier to actually get them onboarded there. So, and in a lot of cases, the processes and the time and effort that it takes can be overwhelming for a lot of organizations. So this is another good thing to keep in mind. So here are some of the common challenges, and obviously looking at how can you potentially address them. So first of all, around that user experience, you want to be looking at ways of how can you actually help the users to access information through a single point of access. So a single place where people can access that. Depending on your solution landscape, that may look slightly different, but thinking about how you can streamline access to information. From a security point of view, you will look at things like identity and access management. So making sure that you can manage user credentials, whether they are your internal supply chain users or then external partner users, that you can manage them effectively. Integration, lots of modern integration tools out there. I think a lot of organizations have more tools that they would actually need. So there's actually a lot of room for consolidation, and still you may have some issues with certain kinds of functionalities. And then finally, it's the partner onboarding. So making sure that you have the right tools and processes to facilitate onboarding of partners to the tools that they need to be using. Then if we go into looking at what are some of the steps that you can take to really add governance into your existing collaboration processes. So my advice around this topic would be really to start by looking at your existing tools and solutions. So what do you have in use? And depending on the size of the organization, the complexity of your landscape will vary, but usually, and particularly when I'm speaking with large organizations, they tend to have a lot of different kinds of tools. And even if you're speaking with the central IT team, they might not even know what kinds of tools they have. So it might be a surprise for them that they actually have more tools that they were aware of. And there are various kinds of reasons for that. In large organizations, obviously, previously things may have been run independently in regions, whereas you've later on wanted to consolidate and centralize things. You may have gone through mergers and acquisitions, these kinds of situations. So really understanding in detail what you have and what are the tools that you are using today, surprisingly difficult, but very much needed to really understand how you can move forward and how you can optimize things. The second step would really be to assess what are the needs that you have as a business now, and then what are you going to have going forward. So are there things like new compliance regulations that you have to meet? How are you serving different kinds of stakeholders? What's the resourcing requirement for these, and so on. So really understanding what do you need to do as a business. And then finally, moving into I'm calling it modernization of these capabilities. It could be consolidation, but looking at how do you get into a place where you have an efficient and technology stack that really supports your business requirements in an optimal way, but also how do you get there in a sustainable pace? Because it's not going to be just about technology. It's also going to be about user adoption and making sure that you can manage that change within the organization, get the stakeholders on board and using the tools. And again, we see this a lot with external partners. So some organizations have more leverage than others to get their partners to behave in certain ways. But in a lot of cases, it's not going to be as straightforward as now we have this new great tool and now all of our problems go away, but it's going to take a bit more work to really get to that point. So these would be roughly the steps that I would recommend you to go through. And then before we go into the panel discussion, I did want to mention just quickly that, or rather raise a point that in addition to just looking at how you can actually address your current collaboration challenges, how you can increase the digital collaboration with suppliers, you also need to be thinking beyond that. And I think this is part of the motivation of actually going down this route. So if we look at the top priorities that organizations have, and this is specific to reducing supply chain risk, and this is another IDC stat from a couple of years ago, but really collaborating with partners is on the list. It's number 4 there when it comes to risk mitigation, so very important. But the top 2 ones are really visibility and agility. And if you look at what is needed from organization, yes, you need to be able to get information from your suppliers, from your other partners, but that's not really enough. You also have to manage complexity. So there's, again, more complex processes, more requirements around the information sharing, different types of information that needs to be shared. And then also that data is oftentimes siloed. As complexity increases, that information silos tend to increase as well. So you need to be thinking about how can you actually really gain visibility across things, and how can you actually make sure that you can still act on things even though things are more complex. So we oftentimes say that, yes, it's complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated. So I think that's a good guideline to go by. And before going into the panel discussion, this is sort of a very high-level roadmap that we're kind of using with some of our customers, really to kind of talk about the different kinds of things and what's needed for them to really realize their vision of where they want to take their supply chain. So in a lot of cases, the current state in organizations is something like this. So you have multiple different supply chain applications that you're using. You probably are using various different kinds of portal solutions. And if you are, you may be thinking about adopting new ones because you need to be sharing more information. You may have several different types of integration tools. Again, it's surprising how messy this can be, particularly in those large organizations. And despite all of these tools, you still have a large number of processes that leverage, let's say, unstructured paper is still being used quite a lot, but also things like email, sharing Excels, and information that's sort of digital, but it's not really structured digital. So you cannot really apply the same kinds of analytics tools for that. So the first step that we're recommending and what we're discussing here is really of building that unified digital community. So digital foundation for your supply chain, where you're looking at how can we help the users be more productive? How can we help them access information in a meaningful and purposeful way? How can we potentially consolidate some of the integration tools that there are to, again, reduce cost, but then also streamline access to information so that it's not siloed in so many places. And then also eliminating that non-digital, unstructured type of communication that still persists in a lot of organizations today. Because what this paves way for is really what we are calling a command center. You might be calling it a control tower 2.0, advanced control tower, different kinds of visibility solutions, but really, how can you drive value from that supply chain data that you have? And you can't do that unless it's digital. So I oftentimes say that, companies talk about their AI strategies, but you can't apply AI on a piece of paper. You have to have that data in a structured format so that you actually automatically process that. And there is really where you get into this end-to-end visibility of your supply chain. You can drive action from the insights. There might be additional views that you realize that you actually don't have a need to adopt more new capabilities. And then another very crucial point is the data quality enforcement. So making sure that you have tools and processes in place to monitor and really address any issues with data quality. And in turn, so that's obviously something that a lot of organizations are looking at right now. But if you think about it, if you have all of your information in a digital format, we're talking about a bit of a dream here, but if you have all of your information in a digital format, you can trust your information, and how your business operates, and you have data-driven insights into that. You actually get closer to being able to really build what we would call an autonomous supply chain or autonomous supply chain network. So you can create closed loop automation in processes. Again, we all know that supply chain is all about managing chaos, but this is a way where you can actually find those areas where actually do we need people to actually touch these processes, or will they actually just work because we can monitor them and then manage by exception? So this would be obviously it's a goal for a lot of organizations, but you have to go through certain steps to really get there, and you need that foundation, and you need to be able to make sure that you understand what's going on in the business and you can trust your data. So this is what I wanted to cover, and at this point we're going to move over to the panel discussion. So back to you, Helen.
Thanks, Philo. That was really interesting. And I particularly like the chart that showed the impact on revenue and profitability, excuse me. I think I'd like to see a chart about how much happier supply chain managers are when the company gets digitally mature. Because that's, I think really what we're talking about here is making life easier and making things work better. So actually, my first question that I wanted to ask you was, this whole thing about inventory, taking an inventory of what you're currently working with. And so I'm curious, would it be best to work with your IT department to get, to really get the full list of what's being used?
Yes, IT is definitely, and I would recommend. So I think this depends on organization, but I actually just last week had a customer call where we were discussing the shadow IT. So the business not being, happy enough with the IT team providing solutions, so they went out and bought their own solutions. So, and that obviously fragments the landscape even more. So definitely collaborate with IT. I would say that one part within that IT team, and I think a crucial role in all of this, would be the enterprise architect. So that is, I would say that as the IT function is maturing, I would say that enterprise architects are really in that role where they can really deliver the capabilities, but in a way that's governed. So they can, that's their job, is really to think about things in entities, and how do we deliver certain capabilities without really going into that point solution kind of mixed bag of tools that we have. So that would be, so yes, IT, and in particular I think enterprise architects they have a crucial role in this.
Right, because I'm sure it quite often it turns up that different departments are using different applications that actually they could all be using the same one, or they could get rid of them, or whatever. So there's probably quite a lot of redundancy that you find at the beginning of this process. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say so, yes. And again, it is surprising how little companies actually know about their solutions that they have. So there might be a discovery exercise that needs to happen internally. It might be like even within IT, like they might not have everything, even though it sounds maybe surprising, but it can happen. And we've kind of seen this again. Large organizations are one thing. I mean, smaller organizations, it's going to be more straightforward. But I wouldn't underestimate the challenge of simply finding out what you have.
Right. Yes. I mean, I'm sure everybody watching this right now has applications on their computer that they don't even know they. I know I for sure do. So that's a really great sort of practical piece of advice. I like that. So let's widen the picture out a little bit. What are some of the key drivers for, why do companies need to share more data with their suppliers. We're reading a lot about this and hearing a lot about this now, but what's the why? Why do we need to do this?
Yeah, so I obviously talked about, and my main focus was really the link between sharing information or collaboration and then the supply chain maturity. So if you want to perform better on a higher maturity level, it's sort of a natural place for you to go to. Like that's how you improve maturity, is to focus on that collaboration. But I would say that some other key drivers that we see can be regulatory in nature. So there are a couple of the, let's say, different streams of ESG related regulations that at least we are tracking quite closely, that are currently really forcing companies really to at least think about their strategy of, and also the upcoming information sharing needs and information collecting needs. But Scope 3 emissions regulations. So this, we know that from the Paris Climate Agreement, we're not quite meeting the 1.5 degree temperature rise globally with global warming, but there are these regulations coming that look at the Scope 3, and they are going to impose mandates on you actually reporting on those. And if you think about the just the structure of carbon emissions in an organization, around 25% of your emissions come from your direct operations and then the energy that you buy, and the rest of the 75 come from your upstream, the things that your suppliers do, through the products and raw materials that you purchase, and then what you sell to your customers and how they use the product. So it's 75% of your emissions. And that's a major challenge for organizations on how you can actually start reporting on that. And you need to collect information from your external ecosystem, both on the supplier side and then on the customer side. And the other regulation that is more, so the Scope 3 is most Western countries, it's a global requirement in nature. But then in Europe, there is this supply chain due diligence regulation. So Germany has actually taken lead on this. So they last year implemented a law around supply chain due diligence. So collecting information and having safeguards in place that you can detect and address any human rights violations that you have down in your supply chain, not just with tier 1, but also like down the tiers. So that also requires you to have processes and ways in which you can really monitor things and essentially collect information from your direct suppliers, but then also trying to see beyond the tier 1 to address and meet those regulatory changes. So European Union is currently, there's a discussion going on about a directive there, but that's definitely another thing. So yeah, lots of different kinds of things. I would say that both on the business side, as we discussed the supply chain maturity and business performance, but then also there might be regulatory considerations that you have to look into.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot to be thinking about there, and it just lots of drivers towards increased collaboration and better data flowing back and forwards. That's great. So how does an organization's existing supply chain maturity play into this? And I mean, how do we have a sort of perfect leadership that leads into supply chain digitization?
Yeah, I think that just due to the nature that as you are increasing your maturity and you are collaborating more, you will face increased complexity. So you have more to deal with. It's sort of paradoxical, but companies that are lower in maturity, they might not have even realized all the kinds of problems that they will face once they are kind of increasing the digital collaboration. So yeah, it's a good question, this. One study that we did that was specific to B2B integration was that only around 5% of organizations are really at the top level of kind of highest maturity of B2B integration. So there's a lot of organizations that have made a lot of advances, but they're still kind of finding their way in some other areas. So there's that. And also, I would just say that the maturity overall, it can be it can be misleading to think about an organization as simply being mature or immature. So I've heard some people actually from very large companies, Gartner top 50 list kinds of companies, making comments like, I can't believe that my organization is so advanced in these areas, but then so backwards in some other areas. So even in a leading organization, you may have areas where there has been no ownership. It hasn't been a big enough problem for anyone to address that. So yeah, I wouldn't it's a good indicator that you're working in the right direction. But this is a complex topic, and I would argue that a lot of organizations, even if they are the leaders, they still have things that they can be doing better.
Right, right. So there's always room for improvement, is what you're saying. Yeah, that's great. So let's dig into some examples. Can you give us some anecdotes about the kinds of challenges you've seen companies face when they're stretching for that maturity in digitization?
Yeah, so there's obviously different kinds of anecdotal things that I tend to talk quite a lot with customers. And definitely something that comes up is the onboarding challenge that I also referenced there earlier. So we were speaking with one organization about onboarding their EDI partners, and they made the comment that, could you also look at onboarding them for a couple of other solutions that we purchased, but just can't seem to make headway. So basically a couple of different supply chain applications from different vendors. Because they've been having trouble. And so they have the right tool. They're confident that this is going to help us. The problem is we can't get our suppliers to use it. We can't get them onboarded. So onboarding is a surprisingly difficult issue. And again, it might be that you're onboarding the same supplier for multiple different tools, but they are all disparate projects. So managing that and looking at adding governance, that might be one thing, and it has come up in conversations. I think that legacy technology overall still is a major challenge for organizations. So another organization that I recently spoke with, they were now getting into the point where they're looking at their integration tools that they're using and consolidating them, because a few years ago they went through a massive ERP consolidation project. So they had regional ERP systems. Could it be even that they had different ERP systems in a same country for different business units? So very complex ERP landscape. And obviously, ERP projects are massive. So they wanted to simplify it as much as they could. So they just only focused on the ERP side of things. But then what that did was, okay, they got their ERP consolidated, but then they all had all of these legacy integration tools lying around, and now they're trying to take inventory of what they have and how they could consolidate the integration side of things. So this is one, again, for the large organizations, legacy integration tools, and also regionally deployed solutions that are not governed overall. They can be a surprisingly difficult issue. And in this organization's case, they actually had integration tools that were deployed by IT teams that were no longer there, because they had also gone through an organizational change. So that was an interesting kind of side flavor to this conversation, that, okay, actually these tools that are still crucial for our business, because our orders, like, there's a lot of our revenues dependent on these integration flows, but there's no owner because that organizational change has happened, but the tools are still there. So that would be another example. I could go on. I think one thing that I would mention is data quality. So this tends to come up as well quite a lot with organizations. And and usually you find that when you are actually going through, like, you're modernizing the integration tools, you will discover what when you're doing your due diligence and kind of looking into how things are operating, you may find this things that are, okay, we have these recurring issues with data quality. This is more on the customer side, but you may have things like EDI chargebacks that you're actually paying a lot of money for flawed information that you're exchanging with partners. So these kinds of things. So, but overall, I would say that data quality is another key thing that tends to come up.
Right. So it sounds like the biggest challenges are, first of all, kind of getting your own house in order, and figuring out what you have, and then also the onboarding process. And it sounds like you're quite often going to have to ask a supplier to onboard multiple systems with you. Is that right?
So yeah, and particularly when you want to drive closer collaborations, or there might be multiple different solutions, because again, you may want to track different parts of your supply chain operations through different tools, and all of those tools, they need the partner to contribute information there. So you need to go through that onboarding for each and every one of them. And usually these are handled as individual projects and not as an overarching, through overarching governance. Yeah.
Right. And so is it better to do it piece by piece like that, and just see it as these independent projects, rather than coming to a supplier and saying, okay, now we have to do all of this at once?
Yeah, I think at least it needs to be a conscious choice. So that's what I would say. So it might be that it's the best way to do it, but at
Mhm.
least you should have an overarching view of, okay, these are all the different things that we do. So this is how we're gonna onboard you, and we're now gonna focus on this area. But at least make it a conscious choice, not an ad hoc exercise.
Right. Super. So, I mean, let's get more specific. What kinds of technology solutions are typically involved with digital collaboration?
Yeah, so multiple different. So we talked about the supply chain applications. So different kinds of applications that have collaborative features, collaborative planning, real-time visibility, these kinds of things. E-procurement, another crucial piece of solution. So other types of supplier portals as well. So oftentimes you again need to collect a lot of different kinds of information from the suppliers. So there might be finance might have something different than the supply chain function and so on in terms of collecting information from suppliers. And then I would say the third kind of category would be the B2B integration solution. So system to system integration, whether it's direct EDI connections or value-added networks, or then potentially industry networks that you are leveraging. So some of these are also upcoming. Particularly automotive is something that tends to have these industry exchanges.
Right. Yes. Yes. We've seen a lot of different platforms emerging in different industries over the last 10 years in particular, I think. So, this is all quite a lot of sort of change management, I would have thought. How should organizations think about modernizing their current collaboration tools? What's the mindset that you're looking for?
Um, I would say that it's the mindset of that enterprise architect. So again, I think that the governance, making sure that you have someone thinking about the interoperability between solutions and making sure that you have you don't have surprises and overlapping capabilities there. So it's very much that enterprise architecture mindset. Like, how do we actually have the capabilities that we need to deliver the value for the business, but how do we do that efficiently, effectively, and in a controlled and governed way?
Right. And I just wanted to touch on something that you were saying before, that getting your arms around this and having an architect, as it were, a system architect who has an overall view, sounds like it actually increases security quite a lot, and that's becoming an increasing concern. So that is another driver of improving your maturity in this way, right?
Yeah, security is definitely an important thing. And again, if you have the way we are looking, there's multiple different aspects to this. I'm not a security expert by no means, but if you look at, there are a few different elements to this. And one thing that we tend to recommend is that centralized identity management, particularly when you need to provide access to your partners to your internal systems. Because if you have one identity to manage, then that's one identity. And then if you have 10 different applications and all of them have their own credentials, some may get expired, get compromised, and so on. You're kind of talking about the threat surface. So centralized identity management is a crucial thing. But then of course there are things like anomaly detection and other kinds of ways of monitoring and security. So it's multi-layered approach. But I think one point that I would say is that identity management is one of the key things when it comes to collaboration.
Yeah, yes. I mean, that sounds important because you're giving people access maybe from the other side of the world, or people that you've only just started dealing with. So it's very important to have your arms around that.
Yeah.
Um, and what is the biggest opportunity you see in terms of digitizing collaboration?
uh, I think that it's really the visibility piece, because that seems to be like everyone wants, and this is like year on year, and particularly since the pandemic, supply chain visibility has been the biggest problem or the holy grail for organizations that they're going after. But really, you cannot really get that unless you have your data digital, unless you can actually get that data in a single place, or have access to the data. So I think the visibility, and then through that, it's the ability to make decisions based on data and not just hunches. So I think that those are really the key things. Again, it's visibility and agility. They seem to be the very trendy words when it comes to improving supply chain. But they have
Resiliency, yes.
exactly, yeah, and resiliency as well. So but there's a good point for that. So they are not just hot air, but they actually mean something. But it's how you get there. That's really the important thing.
Right, yeah, and how you get there is the whole issue, isn't it? How do you go about driving change in an organization, and getting people to adopt these new tools and processes? Is it a top down? Is it a bottom up? What do you see out there as being the most effective way of driving change?
I think you kind of mentioned the key point there. So it's not just about technology, but it's also about people. And I would say it's primarily about the people. So really thinking about how it will help them communicate and getting the buy-in from people before making drastic changes in these. And also, and that means, I think I mentioned it earlier, but moving at a sustainable pace. So really making sure that so you can't really push too hard because people naturally resist change. That's just this. Most humans have that kind of tendency. But if you kind of give agency, if you kind of hear people out and actually get the buy-in before making changes and actually show that, hey, this is beneficial. We're not doing this to make your life miserable. We have a point in doing this. So I think not forgetting about that. I think that's the key thing, because technology, yes, that's needed, but it's ultimately it's going to be about people.
Right, so we're back to the happiness chart now. Yeah.
Yep. That was a good call. Good call.
Fantastic. No, wonderful. So thanks, Vilay. This has been fascinating. Now we're going to bring the audience into this discussion with a Q&A session. And once again, please submit your questions using the tab at the bottom of your screen. We'll not be using people's titles or company names, so you should feel free to ask anything you like. If you don't see your question answered during the webinar, please be assured the OpenText team will reach out to you offline. So let's get going with these questions. Well, here's something that I must admit occurs to me several times a week. Is EDI still a relevant technology to be thinking about? I mean, it feels like it's been around for ages. It's a little bit clunky. There's all these other shiny new technologies coming on board. Where does EDI sit in the general scheme of things?
Yeah, I love that we have a question on EDI that as I said earlier, that's very close to my heart, having been with in this kind of business for a decade now. So yeah, EDI, if you look at the history, it's actually, first of all, it's very fascinating. So EDI actually traces its roots back to 1940s, so the standardization at the Berlin airlift operation. So it was a U.S. Army Master Sergeant Ed Gilbert who actually designed the first, like they were trying to load planes so that they could ship goods into Western Germany because it was land blocked by the Soviet Union. But that was actually we need to load the planes efficiently, therefore we need a standardized way to do this. And that was kind of the first sort of iteration of an EDI standard. And that was then by that same guy who kind of worked on that, he actually developed that into the official standard in the 1960s. And then in the 1960s, we actually got into that electronic data interchange, so sending messages electronically. And it was to do with the over the Atlantics, the shipping lines there. So that was kind of in the 1960s. The document standards that were used, and also the method of how the communication was handled, that was telex network, neither of those have been used for decades. So EDI doesn't really, it's not a technology that has a specific format, but it's simply about how do we exchange information between organizations in a way that both parties understand that. And to me, when I hear and actually speak with quite a lot of IT directors, and they get this question a lot from business, like, why are we using EDI? Why don't we use APIs? And that whole question is sort of misguided, because you can do EDI through APIs. So API is a communication mechanism. EDI means exchanging data electronically, and then there's usually a standard involved. So there's a standard format for the message that you're using. So I would say it's very much relevant, but it's likely not what you think that it is. So I think that's kind of the answer in a nutshell, that it's very much relevant, but modern EDI is different than maybe what you are. I mean, you may have a solution that's been there for 20 years, so you may want to look at that, like, is it still what you need to be doing? But yeah, so it's that's what I would say. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. That I really appreciate that clarification. I think that's incredibly important. And I've got several questions here that sort of lead on from that, which is about, obviously people have pain points with integrating suppliers into their systems. And I have a question here about needing to know the options and the format of the EDI that can be used for purchase orders or PO confirmation, shipment details, invoices, etc. it does seem like there's a bit of an alphabet soup out there, and so many options. How do you sort of choose which formats and standardizations you're going to use for these sort of very commonly like put purchase orders and invoices with the supplier?
Yeah, I think it depends. So different regions have different tendencies. So again, I talked about the ANSI X12 standard. So that's the most commonly one in used in North America. In Europe, tend to favor Edifact, and then there might be some industry-specific formats. So it's really looking at the requirements there, and ultimately it is an agreement between two companies. So if you are looking to onboard a supplier, you want to make sure that you're kind of hearing the supplier out and give them a few options. Like they might want to have a say in that. Usually, unless it's a very, I mean, we've been in the business for 30 years, so you can't throw anything at us that we wouldn't recognize. But with some of the, let's say, more modern integration tools, particularly if you have a general integration platform, they usually do the common formats that they support them. But then there might be some things that are like Rosetta Net and some of the other, like, let's say, more EDI versions that have a more history, let's say, there might be gaps in supporting them. But so yeah, there's no one single answer for that, but it's usually you have options, and usually you want to communicate with the supplier, like what's the best way for our specific situation to do it.
Right, thank you. And actually that leads very nicely into another question from the audience, which is what is the best way to collaborate with the supplier? And I think, the question is, how do you approach a supplier? How do you, what to get the best outcome, to get to yes? What is the best way to approach them? What's the proposition?
I think it's going through the mutual benefits, that it's going to improve timeliness of information, it's going to improve data quality, because again, like if you have less of a chance for typos and these, like when the information is managed in a structured way and electronically, and so you avoid the rekeying, and therefore, if the order is correct once gets delivered correctly, you save the hassle of really having to call back and forth or send emails like, hey, where's my order, what happened with this? So there's a lot of efficiency gains in that data quality aspect. So I would start from the benefits of why we want to do it in the first place. It is an investment usually, so you want to make sure that, okay, this is what's in it for both parties. And I think that when it comes to the actual collaboration, that's actually something that we happen to know, because we do this on behalf of our customers. But there's a lot of communication that needs to happen when you are actually setting things up, and it's the same with the applications that I mentioned. So that's why there might be issues with, like, if you're onboarding suppliers for applications, like it's not that you have the application and they're just going to magically use it, but you actually have to have that discussion and really get the buy-in from them, and it requires communication. So that's another aspect.
And I would have thought it'd be important to figure out who you're communicating with, because it might not be the person that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis just to get, you're buying things from a supplier. Do you need to sort of dig into it a bit and talk to their IT department or somebody, in the C-suite? How does that normally work?
So probably they will likely have a person that's sort of the EDI contact person in their IT department. Some companies may have the supply chain IT as part of the supply chain function, but usually you have there's a person who's responsible for EDI, and I would say that with quite a lot of certainty, that's usually not the C-suite that's responsible. So it's
Right, sure.
there's someone more technically aligned. I would say that's
right.
contact.
Okay, so you need to get to the techie guys at some point, usually.
Yeah.
Good. So can you comment on how a procurement portal like SAP Ariba fits into all this?
Yeah, so we get this a lot as well. So obviously it's in certain kinds of situations. So if you think about the history of Ariba, for example, it's very heavily used in the what we call indirect procurement. So you have direct procurement where you have, say, more strategic supplier relationships, and usually you have indirect sourcing, which is more transactional in nature. So you want to get the best price from the market, and you have multiple suppliers competing for that. So different types of say relationship with suppliers depending on the business situation. So Ariba is usually used for that indirect sourcing, and it's a really good tool for that. But if you think about the complexity of information exchange and what you need to do, and the different types of suppliers that you have, it's unlikely that it will do everything. So it can be an important part, Ariba or the other e-procurement platforms that compete with Ariba, but then it's not the only thing. So it's unlikely that it will be the only thing that you need. So that's the like how it fits in. It can be a crucial part, but then usually you have other things that you need to do, direct connections and maybe other collaboration applications and so on.
Right, right. So that there's no one solution to the complexity of it. Um, Here's a question. This is a really interesting question about data integrity. You know, given the volume and speed of the information flow that's going between supply chain partners, how do you make sure the shared information is accurate and relevant? And how do you catch mistakes in a timely manner?
Yeah, so there are different ways for this, obviously, going from very simple hard-coded data quality rules that, you know, if we get a file and this field can only be a number and it can be a number between these these limits, it can be a negative, for example, like if you buy something and the amount is negative, then that's likely, you know, a mistake, or if it's overly high, it's an exception. Then so there are these like very basic data quality rules that you can hard code into things, and then you have more advanced tools that are more, let's say, analytical in nature, that look at the data quality and again like compare the anomalies. Let's say, okay, this sounds usual, are you quite sure that you want to submit this? If it's about ordering, I'm kind of using ordering as an example here. And also the timeliness of information. So yes, it might be the right order, but did it come at the right time? So depends on the business process and what type. So it's really hard to give a specific answer for improving data quality, but there are different kinds of tools depending on the scenario there. So yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. You mentioned a command center, and is that different from a control tower, or is it just a different name for the same thing?
Yeah. So we've adopted the. It was actually a term coined by Gartner initially. So and they are really, I mean, they like to coin new terms like that. That's part of their business. It's coming up with the new trend. And really making people interested about that. But really, what they are trying to say, and what we are also we agree with that that statement, is that control tower traditionally has meant more of this kind of dashboard-like functionality, and usually a function-specific one. So, for example, a logistics control tower. So we collect information from different kinds of logistics systems, and we display them in this one dashboard so that it's accessible for the user. The difference to that traditional view on the control tower and the command center that Gartner is talking about is really more around having more collaborative in nature. So collecting information, not just from internal systems and displaying it in one place, but also capturing information from your partners and then driving action from that insight. So it's sort of the control tower 2.0, if you will. Like you can also call it that, but yeah, we call it
sounds
we
good.
call it
Yeah.
command center. Yeah.
I'll take that. No, and I think that's a very important distinction, that it's not just the internal processes that are being centralized. It's you're in the middle of this web where you can command the whole supply chain, including what's going on with your suppliers. That's fantastic. One more question from the audience. How do you lead customers to build governance teams to address the information and data silos that are happening internally?
Yeah, so obviously the data strategy, usually we collaborate quite closely. So usually from our point of view, there's usually a lot of interest on the customer side to get governance there. And there's the kind of internal drive and usually it is with the enterprise architecture part of the organization that leads that. Where we come in is usually like helping to apply those, let's say, integrations, collecting information and putting the process rules in place. So we're more of an executor in that sense. But we do work with customers and, you know, maybe give examples of what we've done with other organizations to, you know, so that would be our role. But yeah, usually there's the internal enterprise architecture team that is leading that, and then we're supporting where we can.
Great. And it's a, excuse me, it sounds like examples are a really powerful illustration for you to show what the benefits are.
Yep.
Fantastic. This is all fantastic stuff. I'm afraid we're running out the clock and we have time for one final question. Ville, what should someone watching this webinar do right now to get started on improving their supplier collaboration?
Yeah, that is an excellent question to end with. So I would say that take inventory of what you have first of all. And again, if you're in the supply chain, talk with IT. You're more likely to get the answers through the IT team, and they can do the digging, and they may have to do some digging. So again, depending on the circumstances that we discussed, but understand what you have today. I would say the second point is like dare to dream, particularly if you're in the supply chain, because it's then IT's problem to deliver that. So dare to dream big. What would the world look like if it was perfect? And then figure out a way like, okay, how far are we from that? So again, more mature organizations are likely more closer to that, and then some less mature are further away, but it's still good to have that vision. And then finally, partner with people internally. Again, IT is a major stakeholder. You're going to have others, and then get the right stakeholders engaged and see how you can move into that direction. So it's really understanding where you are today, where you are going. So what's the vision, and then making it reality by partnering with the right stakeholders, including your vendors. I mean, we partner with a lot of our customers, and obviously there's a lot of collaboration going on there, but those would be the three things.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ville. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you to Ville, and thanks especially to you, the audience, for all your fantastic questions and for participating. I think we've learned a lot today about how you build a truly effective, digitally connected ecosystem with your suppliers. We've had a lot of questions today, and we'll be answering the ones we didn't get to with you offline. You'll see a link on your screen now that you can visit for more information on OpenText. Additionally, those of you who registered are also going to get an email later with a link to view the webinar on demand. So if you wanted to have a look at Ville's excellent slides, they'll all be available on the recording. And you can share that link with anyone. They can watch the webinar at their leisure. And of course, there will also be contact information for OpenText. Thank you so much for your participation. Stay safe, stay happy, and enjoy the rest of your day.